The rain was coming down in sheets when she made the biggest mistake of her life. Panicked, desperate, and running out of breath, Vivian slid into the back seat of an idling, blacked-out Mercedes S-Class. She thought it was her salvation from the men hunting her down the alleyway. But as the heavy doors slammed shut and the electronic locks engaged with a heavy, definitive thud, the man in the driver's seat slowly turned around. His eyes were like chipped ice. "Found you," he whispered. The neon signs of Brooklyn bled into the puddles, casting jagged crimson reflections that looked entirely too much like blood. Vivian Hayes ran until her lungs burned her breath, escaping in ragged white plumes against the chill of the October night. She had already kicked off her 3-inch heels 3 blocks ago, the cold asphalt tearing at her stockinged feet. Behind her, the heavy rhythmic thud of boots echoing against the brick walls of the alley told her they were still there. Carlo and Benny, 2 of the most ruthless enforcers for the Moretti crime family. Vivian was not a criminal. She was a 27-year-old art appraiser who lived in a cramped apartment with a fire escape that rattled in the wind. But 24 hours ago, she had been called in to verify the authenticity of a newly discovered Renaissance piece for a private client. What she found wasn't just a forgery. She had inadvertently discovered a series of encrypted account numbers etched microscopically into the canvas, backing the complete offshore routing system for the Moretti family's money laundering empire. She had panicked, she had run, and now she was being hunted. The alley was a dead end. A chain-link fence loomed ahead, topped with razor wire that gleamed maliciously under the flickering streetlight. Vivian let out a strangled sob, her hands pressing against the rough brick wall as she spun around, searching frantically for a way out. That was when she saw it. Parked silently in the shadows of a loading dock, a sleek armored Mercedes S-Class sat with its engine purring exhaust, curling lazily into the rain. The rear passenger door was cracked open just an inch. It was a risk, a terrible, reckless risk. But the sound of Carlo shouting her name from the mouth of the alley made the decision for her. Vivian lunged for the car, pulling the heavy door open and throwing herself onto the plush leather seats. She pulled the door shut behind her, her trembling hands instinctively reaching for the lock. Before her fingers could even brush the panel, a heavy electronic clack echoed through the cabin. The doors locked automatically. She collapsed against the upholstery, gasping for air, the adrenaline making her vision swim. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic beating of the windshield wipers and her own frantic heartbeat. Outside, she watched through the heavily tinted glass as Carlo and Benny sprinted past the car, their guns drawn, completely oblivious to her presence inside the vehicle. She let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. She had made it. She was safe. Comfortable. The voice was low, smooth, and laced with a terrifying calm that made the hairs on the back of Vivian's neck stand at attention. She froze. Slowly, she raised her head, looking past the center console. The man sitting in the driver's seat hadn't been visible from the outside. He shifted, turning to face her, the dim ambient light of the dashboard illuminating his features. He was striking in a brutal, aristocratic sort of way. A sharp jawline, dark hair, neatly styled, and eyes that were a piercing, unforgiving shade of gray. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that screamed old money and new violence. Vivian pressed herself against the door, her hand fumbling desperately for the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Let me out," she demanded, though her voice shook violently. "Please, you don't understand, there are men—" "I know exactly who is out there, Vivian," the man interrupted, his tone even. "Carlo and Benny, amateurs, loud, messy." Her heart stopped. "How do you know my name?" The man leaned his arm casually over the steering wheel, his gaze stripping away every layer of her defense. "Because I've been looking for you for 48 hours. You stumbled into a war you don't understand, Miss Hayes." He tilted his head, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "She hid in the Mafia Boss's car to escape. Quite the irony." He leaned closer, the scent of bergamot and expensive leather filling the space between them. "Found you." "Who are you?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "My name is Roman Costello." he said, shifting the car into drive. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural sound of pure power. And you, Vivian, just stole my leverage. As the Mercedes pulled smoothly out of the alley, leaving the confused Moretti thugs in the rearview mirror, Vivian realized with a sickening twist in her stomach that she hadn't escaped the nightmare. She had just traded one monster for a much, much worse one. The Costello Syndicate was the oldest, most powerful family on the East Coast. If the Morettis were a sledgehammer, Roman Costello was a scalpel. And right now, she was sitting in his passenger seat. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, trying to keep the terror from breaking her voice. "Home," Roman replied, simply not looking back. "We have a great deal to discuss, and you are currently a severe flight risk. Don't touch the windows. They're bulletproof, but the mechanisms are delicate." Vivian sat back in the opulent leather, staring out at the blurred city lights. She was trapped. The drive took over an hour, pulling them far away from the grid of the city and into the secluded, sprawling estates of Long Island. The Mercedes finally slowed, turning onto a private winding driveway flanked by towering wrought iron gates. As they approached, the gates swung open seamlessly, revealing a massive stone mansion bathed in the glow of security spotlights. Men in dark suits patrolled the perimeter, earpieces glinting in the rain. Roman parked the car beneath a grand portico and cut the engine. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "My men will escort you inside. I suggest you don't run. The dogs are loose on the grounds, and they are trained to severely maim anyone who doesn't smell like family." Vivian swallowed hard, nodding once. She was led by a towering man named Declan into a vast foyer adorned with marble floors and antique chandeliers. The house was magnificent, yet suffocating. It felt less like a home and more like a beautifully curated fortress. Declan brought her into a sprawling library, its walls lined with thousands of leather-bound books, a roaring fire crackling in the massive hearth. "Sit," Declan grunted, pointing to a leather Chesterfield sofa before taking his post by the door. 10 minutes later, the double doors opened and Roman walked in. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white dress shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and the edge of dark, intricate ink trailing up his skin. He poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter on a side table, took a slow sip, and finally looked at her. "You look like a drowned rat." He noted his voice devoid of sympathy. "I was running for my life." Vivian shot back a sudden spark of defiance cutting through her fear. "And now I'm being held hostage. Forgive me if I haven't had time to touch up my makeup." Roman paused the glass halfway to his lips. A flicker of genuine amusement danced in his gray eyes. "I appreciate a woman with a spine, Miss Hayes. But let's not pretend you have the high ground here. You are in possession of information that dictates the balance of power in this city." He walked over, sitting in the armchair opposite her, his long legs stretching out. "The piece you appraised from Mason Pendleton, the forged Caravaggio." "It was a fake," Vivian said tightly. "A good one, but the brushwork on the chiaroscuro was entirely too modern. Pendleton wanted me to authenticate it for an auction." "Pendleton is a fool who owes the Moretti family $5 million, Roman corrected. "He was trying to use that painting to wipe his debt, but the Morettis aren't interested in the art. They are interested in what's hidden inside the frame." "The account numbers," she whispered. "Exactly. The entire ledger of their offshore holdings micro-engraved into the wood. The Morettis have been hiding their money from the feds and from me. That ledger is the key to dismantling their entire operation." Roman leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "You saw the numbers. You took photographs for your appraisal." I deleted them." Vivian lied, her heart hammering. Roman sighed a tired, dangerous sound. "Do not lie to me, Vivian. You are alive right now because I need those photos. The Morettis know you found the ledger. They will hunt you to the ends of the earth. They will torture you, break every bone in your hands, and then kill you." I am the only reason you are currently breathing oxygen. Vivian looked away, staring into the fire. She knew he was right. The sheer terror of Carlo and Benny in the alley was proof enough. If I give you what you want, she said quietly, what happens to me? I destroy the Morettis, and you walk away with your life heavily compensated for your troubles under a new identity. Roman set his glass down. But there is a complication. Vivian's head snapped back to him. What complication? The photos aren't enough to satisfy the commission. I need the physical frame. Pendleton panicked when he realized the Morettis were coming for it, and he locked it inside his gallery's subterranean vault. Roman's eyes narrowed. I cannot simply storm the gallery. Pendleton's vault is biometrically sealed, requiring 2 keys, his thumbprint, and the override code. And you don't have the code, she guessed. No, Roman smiled, a dark predatory smile. But you do. You're Pendleton's chief appraiser. You have access to the secondary security tier. Vivian stood up, her bare feet sinking into the Persian rug. No, absolutely not. You want me to help you rob my boss to walk back into the city where the Morettis are actively trying to murder me? I want you to survive. Roman stood as well, towering over her, his presence utterly dominating the room. Tomorrow night, Pendleton is hosting a high society charity gala at the gallery. The entire building will be open, the security protocols temporarily relaxed for the guests. We will attend. You will grant me access to the vault. I will take the frame, and you will be a ghost by morning. We, she echoed, her voice trembling. Yes, Vivian, we. You will be on my arm, my date for the evening. He reached out his warm, calloused fingers, gently brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was so soft, so violently contradictory to the man he was, that it sent a shiver straight down her spine. I will protect you, but you must trust me. She looked up into his eyes, realizing she had absolutely no choice at all. The following evening, Vivian stood in front of a gilded mirror in one of the estate's guest rooms, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The dress Roman had provided was a masterpiece, a sweeping gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her curves with a plunging neckline and a daring slit up the thigh. Around her neck rested a diamond necklace so heavy and brilliant she felt like a walking target. It suits you. She turned. Roman stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo. He looked like the devil himself, polished, lethal, and devastatingly handsome. It feels like armor, she replied, her voice lacking its usual confidence. In our world, appearance is the first line of defense, he said, stepping into the room. He held out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver comms earpiece. Keep this in your left ear. Your hair will cover it. Declan will be on comms monitoring the gallery's security feed. If anything goes wrong, you do exactly as I say. Understood. Vivian took the earpiece, sliding it into place. And if the Morettis are there, they won't dare make a move in a room full of politicians and billionaires, Roman assured her, offering his arm. Shall we? The drive back into Manhattan was agonizingly tense. Vivian sat rigid in the back of the limousine, hyper-aware of Roman's proximity. He was a wall of heat beside her, his calm demeanor entirely at odds with her racing pulse. The Pendleton Gallery was a beacon of light in the upscale Upper East Side district. Photographers flashed their cameras as Roman helped her out of the car, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. The physical contact sent a jolt through her system. He was playing the part of the devoted lover, flawlessly leaning down to whisper in her ear as they walked up the red carpet. Smile, Vivian. We are here to enjoy the art. Inside, the gallery was packed with New York's elite. Waiters carried trays of champagne, and classical music drifted over the low murmur of wealthy conversations. Vivian navigated the room on Roman's arm, forcing a tight smile as she recognized several familiar faces. Target is clear, Declan's voice crackled softly in her ear. Pendleton is currently occupied with the mayor near the front exhibition. You have a 10-minute window before the vault's automated security sweep. Let's view the private collection. Roman murmured loudly enough for a passing waiter to hear, smoothly guiding Vivian toward the rear corridors. The transition from the crowded gala to the silent, restricted hallways was jarring. They reached a heavy steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Vivian's hands shook as she approached the keypad. She punched in her 8-digit override code. The light blinked green, and the heavy door hissed open. They slipped inside, moving down a narrow staircase into the subterranean level. The vault room was cold, lined with humidity-controlled glass cases. At the far end sat the true prize, the fake Caravaggio propped up on an easel. Roman wasted no time. He pulled a sleek metallic tool from his jacket, stepping up to the painting. With surgical precision, he began popping the heavy gilded frame off the canvas. 2 minutes, Declan's voice warned in the earpiece. Hurry, Vivian whispered, checking the hallway behind them. Almost. Roman grunted, applying pressure to the bottom bracket. It snapped loose. He pulled the thick wooden frame free, instantly wrapping it in a custom-fitted silk bag he produced from his coat. Got it. Boss? Declan's voice suddenly cut through, sharp and urgent. We have a problem. Leo Moretti just walked through the front doors. He's not here for the champagne. He's got 4 men with him, and they are heading straight for the lower levels. Vivian's blood ran cold. Leo Moretti was the family's underboss, a man famous for his cruelty. Roman's face hardened into a mask of pure violence. He grabbed Vivian's hand, pulling her away from the vault. Change of plans. We go out through the loading dock. They sprinted down the concrete corridor, the heavy silk bag swinging at Roman's side. But as they turned the final corner toward the exit, the metal doors swung open. Standing there blocking their only escape route was Leo Moretti, flanking by Carlo and another enforcer. Leo smiled a vicious, gold-toothed grin. He slowly drew a suppressed pistol from his jacket. Well, well, Leo drawled, his eyes darting between Roman and the bag. Look who decided to crash the party. Costello, you're getting sloppy, and you brought the little art girl with you. Roman didn't flinch. He pushed Vivian slightly behind him, shielding her body with his own. Leo, you're out of your jurisdiction. Turn around and maybe I won't send your head back to your uncle in a box. Big words for a dead man, Leo sneered, raising the gun. Kill him, take the girl in the frame. Kill him, take the girl in the frame. The words hung in the frigid air of the subterranean corridor, a death sentence delivered with casual cruelty. Leo Moretti's finger tightened on the trigger of his suppressed pistol. Time seemed to fracture for Vivian, slowing to an agonizing crawl. She could see the faint glint of the overhead fluorescent lights reflecting off the deadly black steel of Leo's weapon. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable deafening end. Declan. Lights. Roman's voice was a sharp, guttural command, spoken not into the open air, but down toward the lapel of his jacket. Instantly, the world plunged into absolute, impenetrable darkness. The power to the entire gallery block had been severed. A split second later, the tight corridor erupted in a staccato rhythm of muffled thwips and the harsh, blinding strobes of muzzle fire. Roman moved with terrifying predatory speed. He didn't flinch away from the gunfire. He lunged directly into it. His left hand shoved Vivian hard, sending her tumbling behind the heavy steel frame of a reinforced concrete pillar. She hit the ground, her elbows scraping against the rough floor, her ears ringing violently as bullets ricocheted off the concrete, showering her in sharp, stinging dust. "Stay down!" Roman roared over the chaos. Through the dizzying flashes of gunfire illuminating the dark, Vivian witnessed the brutal efficiency of the Costello Syndicate's boss. He wasn't just a man who gave orders from high-backed leather chairs. He was a weapon forged in the very streets he now ruled. Roman closed the distance to Carlo in 2 long strides, his hand shooting out in the strobe-lit dark to grip the enforcer's wrist. A sickening crack echoed through the hallway, followed by Carlo's agonized scream as his arm snapped. Roman used Carlo's falling body as a human shield, just as the third enforcer fired wildly. He is a monster. Vivian's mind screamed as she pressed her hands over her ears. But right now, he is my monster. Costello, Leo bellowed, his voice echoing in the pitch black. You can't hide in the dark forever. I don't need to. Roman's voice replied, chillingly calm, echoing from a direction Vivian couldn't pinpoint. It was a phantom's whisper. Suddenly, the heavy metal doors of the loading dock at the far end of the corridor exploded inward. The screech of tearing metal was accompanied by the blinding high-beam headlights of a heavily armored matte black Cadillac Escalade smashing through the security barricades. The vehicle skidded on the polished concrete, the heavy tires smoking as it fishtailed to a halt directly between Roman and the remaining Moretti men. The passenger door swung open. "Get in!" Declan yelled from the driver's seat, a submachine gun resting on his thigh. Roman didn't hesitate. He grabbed Vivian by the waist, practically lifting her off her feet, and threw her into the cavernous back seat of the SUV. He dove in right behind her, just as a fresh volley of bullets slammed into the bulletproof exterior of the door. The heavy glass spiderwebbed but held. "Drive! Now!" Roman commanded, slamming the door shut. Declan slammed the Escalade into reverse, spinning the wheel violently before throwing it into drive. The massive engine roared and they tore out of the loading dock, leaving the Pendleton Gallery and the furious shouts of Leo Moretti fading into the rainy New York night. Vivian collapsed against the seat, her chest heaving, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't clasp them together. The midnight blue silk dress was ruined, covered in concrete dust and grease. She looked over at Roman. He was leaning his head back against the headrest. His eyes closed, the silk bag containing the frame resting securely on his lap. Are you okay?" she managed to whisper, her voice entirely devoid of moisture. Roman slowly opened his eyes. He turned to look at her, the streetlights passing outside, casting rhythmic shadows across his sharp features. "I am fine, Vivian." But as the Escalade took a sharp turn onto the FDR drive, the ambient light from a passing truck illuminated the interior of the cabin. Vivian gasped. The left sleeve of Roman's impeccably tailored tuxedo jacket was soaked in a dark, spreading stain. Blood was dripping steadily from his fingertips, pooling onto the luxurious floor mats. "You're shot," she said, panic suddenly spiking in her chest. "Roman, you're bleeding." "Yeah, it's a graze," he said tightly, though his jaw was clenched in obvious pain. "Declan, reroute. We aren't going back to the estate. The Morettis will be tracking traffic patterns by now. Take us to the Warren Street safe house." "Copy that, boss," Declan replied, his eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirrors. Vivian reached out instinctively, her trembling fingers hovering over his torn sleeve. "You need a hospital. That's not a graze, it's a through and through." Roman caught her wrist. His grip was firm yet entirely gentle. His skin was burning hot against hers. "No hospitals. Hospitals mean police, and police mean questions I cannot afford to answer. We handle this in-house. You've done well tonight, Vivian. Just breathe." She stared at where his hand held hers, the stark contrast of his blood-stained knuckles against her pale skin. She had survived the alley. She had survived the gallery. But as she sat in the back of the speeding, blood-soaked SUV with the most dangerous man in the city, she realized the terrifying truth. She wasn't just a captive anymore. She was an accomplice. The safe house was a brutalist masterpiece hidden in plain sight. It was a sprawling top-floor penthouse in the heart of Tribeca, accessible only via a private biometric elevator hidden behind a false wall in a commercial parking garage. When the elevator doors finally parted, Vivian was met with a stark modern space of exposed brick floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass overlooking the Hudson River and cold steel furnishings. It was a place designed for utility and survival, entirely devoid of warmth. Roman stumbled slightly as he stepped out of the elevator. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of the blood loss was setting in. Declan rushed forward, supporting his boss's weight. "Medical kit is in the primary bathroom," Roman gritted out, waving Declan off. "Secure the perimeter. Make sure the comms encryptions are rotating." "Boss, I should—" "Do your job, Declan!" Roman snapped, the commanding authority slicing through the pain. Declan nodded sharply and disappeared down the hall. Roman walked heavily to the kitchen island, dropping the silk-wrapped frame onto the marble counter before shrugging out of his ruined jacket with a sharp hiss of breath. His white dress shirt was a mess of crimson. Vivian stood frozen by the elevator, entirely out of her depth. "Vivian." Roman called out, his voice softer now. He leaned heavily against the marble counter, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "I need your help." She swallowed hard, dropping her clutch to the floor, and rushed to the bathroom to retrieve the heavy black trauma kit. When she returned, Roman had managed to unbutton his shirt, stripping it down to his waist. He was a canvas of violence and art. Symmetrical, intricate tattoos mapped across his shoulders and chest, heavily contrasted by a roadmap of old faded scars. The fresh wound was on his left bicep, a clean, jagged tear where the bullet had ripped through the muscle, narrowly missing the bone. I'm not a doctor," she stammered, opening the kit with shaking hands. "I appraise 16th century oil paintings. I don't stitch people." "You don't need to stitch it. It went clean through." Roman instructed, his breathing shallow but controlled. "Just clean it with the iodine. Pack it with the hemostatic gauze and wrap it tight. I'll guide you." Vivian took a deep breath, forcing the panic down into a tight box in the back of her mind. She picked up the iodine swab. "This is going to hurt." "I am well acquainted with pain, Miss Hayes." As she worked, the silence in the penthouse stretched thick and heavy. She was forced to step uncomfortably close to him, her hands steadying themselves against his warm, hard chest as she cleaned the wound. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palms. He didn't flinch. He didn't make a sound. He simply watched her, his intense gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Why didn't you leave me in the vault?" she asked softly, wrapping the heavy white bandage around his bicep and securing it tightly. "You had the frame. I was slowing you down." Roman reached up with his uninjured arm, his fingers gently brushing a streak of concrete dust from her cheekbone. "Because in my world, loyalty is the only currency that matters. You kept your end of the bargain. You got me into the vault. Leaving you to Leo Moretti would have been a violation of my code." He paused, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "And because I protect what is mine." The words hung in the air, a dangerous, possessive claim that made her breath hitch. Before she could decipher the heavy implication, Roman stepped back, pulling a fresh black t-shirt from a nearby chair and pulling it over his head. "Now," he said, the momentary vulnerability vanishing, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating syndicate boss. "Let us see what people are so desperate to die for." He approached the marble counter and carefully unwrapped the silk bag, revealing the ornate, gilded wooden frame. To the untrained eye, it was just a beautiful piece of Renaissance woodwork. To Vivian, it was a death sentence. Roman produced a heavy tactical knife from his belt. He wedged the thick steel blade into the seam of the bottom wooden bracket and twisted violently. The ancient wood splintered with a sharp crack. He repeated the process on the remaining corners until the frame was completely dismantled into 4 long pieces. The inner lining. Vivian pointed, her appraiser instincts kicking in. "Look at the density of the wood on the right side panel. It's hollowed out." Roman nodded, pressing the blade down the length of the wood, splitting it completely in half. Inside the hollowed-out cavity lay a vacuum-sealed plastic envelope. Roman pulled it out, slicing it open. He dumped the contents onto the marble counter. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a treasure trove of financial destruction. Roman spread the items out, his eyes scanning the materials with terrifying speed. None, the master ledger. 3 microscopic, high-density microfiche slides containing thousands of encrypted routing numbers. The blackmail file. A physical stack of glossy photographs depicting a New York Supreme Court judge accepting briefcases of cash from Leo Moretti. The bank key. A heavy physical titanium safety deposit box key. Roman picked up the key, examining the crest stamped into the metal. Well, well, the Morettis have been busy. This key belongs to a vault at Lombard Odier. Vivian frowned. Lombard Odier, the private bank in Geneva. The very same. Roman said, a lethal smile touching his lips. One of the oldest, most exclusive private banks in Switzerland. They don't ask questions, and they require a physical key and a biometric scan to access their deep storage vaults. Whatever is in that box in Geneva is the true heart of the Moretti Empire. This ledger is just the map. Roman picked up a small magnifying loupe from the counter, likely a tool Declan had prepared, and held it over the first microfiche slide, squinting at the microscopic text. The offshore accounts are routed through shell corporations, Roman muttered, reading the tiny print. Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and, wait, Roman froze. His posture went completely rigid. He lowered the loupe, looking up at Vivian with an expression she had never seen on him before. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock, quickly hardening into absolute fury. "What?" Vivian asked, stepping forward, her stomach dropping. "Roman, what is it?" Roman didn't speak. He simply handed her the loupe and pointed to a specific line on the tiny slide. Vivian leaned over, pressing her eye to the glass. She scanned the tiny microscopic ledger lines. It listed dates, massive offshore wire transfers, and the names of the receiving shell corporations. Most of them meant nothing to her. But then her eyes landed on a specific line item. Transfer $4,500,000 US. Destination Banque Cantonale Vaudoise Lausanne. Beneficiary account holder Mason Pendleton. Note payment for authentication/appraisal obfuscation V. Hayes. Vivian stumbled backward, the loupe slipping from her fingers and clattering loudly against the marble counter. The air was violently sucked from her lungs. The room started to spin. "No!" She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, that's impossible." Mason Pendleton wasn't a victim of the Morettis. Roman stated, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He is their partner. He is the one laundering their money through the high-end art market using forged provenance. But he hired me to appraise it. Vivian cried out, the betrayal feeling like a physical knife twisting in her gut. If he knew it was a fake, if he knew the ledger was inside, why would he bring me in? Why would he let me find it? Roman stepped around the counter, closing the distance between them. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes fierce and unforgiving. Because he needed a fall guy, Vivian. Pendleton knew I was closing in on his gallery. He knew the commission was investigating the Moretti money. He purposely gave you the painting to appraise. He wanted you to find the microscopic encryption. Roman's grip tightened slightly. Because when you found it, he immediately tipped off Carlo and Benny. He sent them to the alley to kill you. Tears, hot and angry, pricked the corners of Vivian's eyes. Her boss, her mentor for the last 5 years, he hadn't just fired her. He had systematically arranged for her execution to cover his own tracks. "He framed you, Vivian," Roman said softly, his thumbs brushing against her collarbones. "He set you up to die so that he could tell the Morettis that a rogue appraiser stole their ledger, neatly removing himself from the crosshairs." Vivian stared up at Roman, the fear that had been paralyzing her for 2 days, suddenly evaporating. In its place, a cold, blinding rage began to build. She looked at the blood-staining Roman shirt, at the titanium key resting on the counter, and finally at the man standing before her. "Roman," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, completely stripped of its former innocence. "How do we get into Lombard Odier?" Roman stared at her, the silence in the Tribeca penthouse stretching until it felt brittle enough to snap. The vulnerability that had clouded Vivian's eyes only moments ago was entirely gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline fury. She was no longer a frightened civilian hiding in the backseat of a car. She was a woman who had just realized she had been pushed into the abyss by the man she trusted most. A slow, devastatingly handsome smile spread across Roman's face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a kindred spirit. "We don't just walk into Lombard Odier Vivian." Roman said, his voice a low rumble of approval. "The bank sits on the Rue de la Corretterie. It is a fortress of Swiss discretion. To access a high-security biometric vault, you need the physical key, which we have, and the primary account holder's retinal scan, which means we need Mason Pendleton." "Then we find him!" Vivian demanded, her voice hard. Declan's heavy footsteps echoed against the hardwood as he re-entered the living area, a tablet in his hand. He took one look at the dismantled frame on the marble island and the fierce posture of the woman standing next to his boss and raised an eyebrow. "Boss?" "I tapped into the Pendleton Gallery's private server using Miss Hayes's credentials," Declan reported, handing the tablet to Roman. "Mason Pendleton wasn't just stalling the mayor at the gala. He slipped out the side exit right before Leo Moretti breached the vault. Flight records show a private charter of Bombardier Global 7500 tail number N442X took off from Teterboro Airport 20 minutes ago. Destination, Geneva Cointrin." "He's going for the money," Vivian breathed. "He knows the Morettis will kill him for losing the ledger. He's going to empty the vault and disappear." "Not if we beat him there," Roman stated, tossing the tablet back to Declan. "Prep the Dassault Falcon. Have the pilots file an expedited flight plan. We leave in 20 minutes. "And the Morettis?" Declan asked. "Let Leo tear up Manhattan looking for us," Roman replied, slipping his ruined jacket back over his injured arm. "By the time he realizes the ledger is on its way to Europe, we will already have the keys to his kingdom." The drive to Teterboro Airport was a blur of rain-slicked highways and adrenaline. Within an hour, Vivian was sitting in the plush cream leather interior of the Costello family's private Dassault Falcon 8X. The twin-engine jet cut through the stormy night sky, climbing above the heavy clouds into the calm, starlit stratosphere over the Atlantic. Vivian sat by the window, staring out into the blackness. The sheer velocity of her life's unraveling was finally catching up to her. 48 hours ago, her biggest concern was paying her heating bill and authenticating brushstrokes. Now she was flying to Switzerland with an organized crime syndicate boss to intercept a multi-million-dollar money laundering cache. She felt the leather seat beside her dip. Roman settled into the chair next to her. He had changed into a fresh black cashmere sweater and dark trousers from the plane's wardrobe. He handed her a crystal tumbler of Macallan 25. "Drink," he ordered softly. "It will steady your nerves." Vivian took the glass, the heavy crystal grounding her shaking hands. She took a sip, the liquid burning a smooth, warm path down her throat. "Does the bleeding ever stop?" she asked, her voice quiet. "In your world, I mean. Does it ever just end?" Roman rested his forearms on his knees, staring down at the amber liquid in his own glass. "No," he admitted quietly. "You learn to manage the bleeding. You learn to strike first so that the blood spilled isn't your own. It is a brutal existence, Vivian, but it is the one I inherited." She turned to look at him. Stripped of his tailored suits and the immediate threat of gunfire, he looked tired. There was a profound weight behind his gray eyes, a burden of command that he could never truly set down. "You didn't have to bring me," she said. "You have the key. You have the ledger. You could have left me in that penthouse with a plane ticket to anywhere." Roman reached out his warm fingers, wrapping gently around her wrist. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of heat straight to her core. He slowly pulled her hand toward him, his thumb brushing over her racing pulse. "I told you," Roman murmured, leaning closer, the scent of bergamot and danger intoxicating her senses. "I protect what is mine." "I'm not property, Roman," she whispered, her breath catching in her throat as his face hovered inches from hers. "No," he agreed, his eyes dropping to her lips. "You are a revelation. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who cower, who lie, who want my power or my head. You stared down a gun in a dark alley and chose to fight. You stitched my arm without flinching. You discovered the man who raised you in this industry betrayed you, and your first instinct was to go to war. He closed the remaining distance, his lips brushing softly against hers. It was a tentative touch, a question asked in the dark. Vivian's mind screamed at her to pull away, to remember who this man was, but her body betrayed her logic. She leaned into him, closing her eyes as his hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her into a kiss that was a terrifying mix of savage possession and deep, desperate hunger. For a moment, suspended 35,000 feet above the ocean, there were no assassins, no ledgers, no betrayals. There was only the heat of his skin, the taste of expensive scotch, and the intoxicating realization that she was falling in love with a monster. Geneva was bathed in the crisp golden light of early morning when the Falcon touched down. A sleek Mercedes Maybach was waiting on the tarmac, bypassing customs entirely under the guise of diplomatic privilege, one of the many perks of the Costello family's vast legitimate business network. They drove through the pristine, orderly streets of the Swiss city. The contrast between the bloody chaos of New York and the serene, wealthy quiet of Geneva was jarring. The Maybach pulled up to an imposing neoclassical stone building on the Rue de la Coraterie. There were no flashy signs, only a modest brass plaque that read Lombard Odier and CA. Pendleton's flight landed 45 minutes before ours, Declan noted from the front seat, tapping his earpiece. He's inside. Roman turned to Vivian. Follow my lead. Do not speak unless spoken to by the bank staff. The Swiss value protocol above all else. They stepped out of the car, flanked by Declan and another silent Costello operative. Inside, the bank felt more like a cathedral than a financial institution. Vaulted ceilings hushed whispers, and the smell of old money permeated the air. A meticulously dressed concierge approached them immediately. Monsieur Costello. The concierge bowed slightly, recognizing Roman immediately. An honor to have you visit our Geneva branch. How may we assist you today? I require access to the subterranean viewing rooms, Roman said smoothly, projecting the aura of a legitimate billionaire. I am here to oversee a transaction with an associate, Mr. Mason Pendleton. He should be down there now. The concierge hesitated for a fraction of a second, a massive tell for a Swiss banker. Ah, yes, Mr. Pendleton is indeed in viewing room 4. However privacy protocols dictate, I am aware of the protocols. Roman interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a chilling authority that brooked no argument. Take me to him, now! The concierge swallowed, nodding tightly. Right this way, monsieur. They were led down a spiraling marble staircase into the heavily fortified belly of the bank. The air grew cooler. They walked down a long corridor lined with heavy steel doors. The concierge stopped outside room 4, unlocking the heavy deadbolt with a master keycard before stepping aside. Roman pushed the door open. Inside the stark, brightly lit room, Mason Pendleton was frantically shoving stacks of bearer bonds and velvet jewelry boxes into a large Rimowa aluminum suitcase. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his sparse hair was disheveled, and he was sweating profusely. He froze as the door opened, his eyes darting to Roman, and then with absolute horror to Vivian. Vivian. Mason choked out the color draining from his face. The heavy titanium box from the vault sat open on the table between them. Hello, Mason, Vivian said, stepping into the room. Her voice was ice. She felt Roman standing right behind her, an imposing wall of lethal protection. I thought, Mason stammered, backing away from the table. Carlo said he had you cornered. Carlo is currently trying to learn how to write with his left hand. Roman interjected smoothly, closing the heavy steel door behind Declan, sealing the 4 of them inside the soundproof room. And you, Mason, are out of time. Mason's eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Listen to me, Costello. You can have the money, all of it. There's over 50 million in untraceable bonds in this case. Just let me walk away. The Morettis will kill me if I go back to New York. You sent men to kill me. Vivian stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. I worked for you for 5 years. I looked up to you, and you sold me out for a percentage of a mafia laundering scheme. I had no choice. Mason pleaded, tears pooling in his eyes. Leo Moretti threatened my family. They found out I was skimming off the top of the appraisals. They were going to kill my daughter Vivian. You were a sacrifice. I'm sorry, but I had to choose. Vivian stared at the pathetic, broken man before her. The anger that had fueled her across the Atlantic suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow disgust. You're a coward, Mason. Roman stepped past her, approaching the table. He ignored the millions of dollars in bonds. Instead, he reached into the open titanium lockbox and pulled out a single leather-bound journal. He flipped it open, his gray eyes scanning the handwritten pages. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating. Roman's expression darkened. "What is it?" Vivian asked, sensing the sudden dangerous shift in his demeanor. Roman didn't look up from the book. Mason wasn't just laundering money for the Morettis. He was holding their insurance policy. This journal contains the names, dates, and payout amounts for every politician, judge, and police commissioner on Leo Moretti's payroll. Roman finally looked up, his eyes locking onto Mason with a terrifying, lethal calm. And it contains the names of the informants planted inside the other 5 families. Mason pressed himself against the back wall, trembling violently. Roman turned the journal toward Vivian, pointing to a name halfway down the page. Vincent Vinny Costello, Capo Bronx Territory. Monthly payout $50,000. Vivian gasped. Vincent was Roman's uncle. His own flesh and blood was selling out the Costello syndicate to the Morettis. "You didn't just steal my money, Mason," Roman whispered, dropping the journal onto the table. "You held the proof of a rat in my own house, and you hid it to save your own pathetic life." Roman drew his suppressed pistol with lightning speed, aiming it directly at Mason's chest. "Roman, wait!" Vivian shouted, grabbing his arm. "Don't! Not here! The Swiss police!" Before she could finish her sentence, the heavy steel door of the viewing room violently exploded off its hinges. The deafening blast of a breaching charge sent concrete and metal shrapnel tearing through the room. Vivian was thrown backward by the shockwave, hitting the floor, hard, her ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. Through the thick, choking smoke pouring into the room, 4 men clad in black tactical gear and gas masks stepped over the ruined doorway. They weren't Swiss police. They were heavily armed mercenaries, and standing behind them, dressed in a sharp beige suit with a smug smile on his face, was Leo Moretti. "Did you really think," Leo's voice boomed over the ringing in Vivian's ears, "that I wouldn't put a tracker in my own vault key Costello?" Leo casually raised an assault rifle, aiming it directly at Roman through the smoke. "Kill them all. Leave the girl for me." The deafening roar of the assault rifle tore through the pristine silence of Lombard Odier. Bullets shredded the air, violently chewing through the plaster walls and shattering the heavy glass display tables. Roman reacted with a speed that defied human limitations. He didn't try to shoot back immediately. His only priority was the woman beside him. He tackled Vivian to the ground, his body covering hers as they crashed hard behind a massive, overturned mahogany appraisal desk. A second later, the desk shuddered violently under a barrage of high-caliber rounds, raining heavy splinters and dust down upon them. Mason Pendleton was not as fast. Caught completely in the open, the corrupt appraiser let out a brief gurgling cry as the mercenary's crossfire ripped through him. He collapsed backward onto the floor, his blood pooling rapidly across the polished marble, staining the millions of dollars in scattered bearer bonds he had died trying to steal. "Declan's suppressing fire!" Roman bellowed over the deafening noise. From the hallway, Declan leaned around the shattered doorframe, his HKMP-5 submachine gun roaring to life. A precise, controlled burst caught the lead mercenary in the chest, dropping him instantly. The remaining 3 men scrambled for cover, diving behind the thick concrete pillars of the vault room. "You can't win this, Costello!" Leo Moretti's voice echoed from the corridor, laced with manic, desperate laughter. "You're boxed in, hand over the girl and the ledger, and I'll make it quick." Roman ignored him. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out the leather-bound journal and the microfiche slides, shoving them firmly into Vivian's hands. His gray eyes were wild, completely consumed by the cold, calculating violence of his world. "Put these in your dress. Do not let them go," he commanded, his voice a harsh rasp. He checked the magazine of his pistol. "When I give the word, you run for the hallway. Declan will cover you." "I am not leaving you in here!" Vivian shouted back, her fingers trembling as she shoved the ledger into the bodice of her dress. "You will do exactly as I say, Vivian," Roman growled, gripping her chin. "This is not a negotiation. I am getting you out of here." Before she could argue, Roman spun around the edge of the desk. He didn't fire blindly. He aimed with lethal, terrifying precision. 2 suppressed puffs sounded in rapid succession. The second mercenary dropped a neat hole, punched straight through his gas mask. Now, Vivian scrambled to her feet. The adrenaline flooded her system, drowning out the fear. She sprinted toward the ruined doorway just as Declan laid down another heavy volley of covering fire. She practically collided with the towering bodyguard, who grabbed her by the arm and yanked her into the relative safety of the corridor. "Boss, move!" Declan yelled, but his voice was suddenly cut short by a wet, sickening thud. Vivian gasped as Declan stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. A bullet had grazed his collarbone, painting his white shirt crimson. Inside the vault room, Roman was trapped behind the desk as the final mercenary and Leo pinned him down. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and the coppery tang of blood. Outside the bank, the faint but rapidly approaching wail of Swiss police sirens cut through the morning air. "Time's up, Leo!" Roman shouted from the cover of the desk. "The police cantonale are 60 seconds away. You really want to be caught in a Swiss vault with 4 bodies and an assault rifle? I'm not leaving without that ledger!" Leo screamed, stepping blindly into the room, his weapon raised. That was the mistake Roman had been waiting for. Roman didn't shoot Leo. Instead, he aimed his pistol at the heavy red emergency glass panel mounted on the wall next to the vault's primary servers. It was Lombard Odier's catastrophic anti-raid failsafe. He fired a single shot, shattering the glass and destroying the circuitry within. A blaring automated siren immediately filled the subterranean level. Flashing red strobe lights ignited overhead. The automated voice of the security system announced in calm French, "Verrouillage d'urgence. Fermeture des portes de la chambre forte dans 5 secondes." Emergency lockdown. Vault doors closing in 5 seconds. "No." Leo yelled, realizing exactly what was happening. He spun around, scrambling toward the doorway. Roman vaulted over the desk, sprinting for the exit. He hit the corridor just as the massive 18-inch thick titanium blast doors began to violently slide shut. Leo lunged for the gap, but the third mercenary, panicked by the sirens, shoved past him, knocking the underboss to the floor. The mercenary didn't make it. The doors slammed shut with a catastrophic, earth-shaking boom, trapping Leo Moretti inside the impenetrable vault with millions in stolen bonds, Mason Pendleton's corpse, and absolutely no way out. "Let's move," Roman ordered, grabbing Vivian's hand and hauling Declan up by his uninjured arm. They ran up the spiraling marble staircase, bursting into the main lobby just as heavily armed Swiss police vehicles swarmed the Rue de la Coraterie outside. The concierge, pale and shaking, had already unlocked a discreet employee exit at the rear of the building. "Monsieur Costello," the concierge whispered frantically. "The alleyway, quickly." They slipped out into the cold, crisp Geneva morning, abandoning the Maybach and disappearing into the labyrinth of narrow cobblestone side streets. Behind them, the Swiss authorities stormed the bank unknowingly, capturing the underboss of the Moretti crime family and effectively decapitating their entire New York operation. As they climbed into a stolen Audi A8 that Declan hot-wired with his good hand, Vivian collapsed against the back seat. She pulled the leather-bound journal from her dress, her hands shaking violently as she handed it to Roman. He took at his blood-stained fingers, brushing hers. He looked at her, covered in plaster dust, bruised and breathing heavily. "You did perfectly," he whispered, the ruthless killer melting away, leaving only the man who had torn apart a city to keep her safe. 2 weeks later. The storm that ravaged the New York underworld was absolute. The fallout from Geneva was catastrophic for the Moretti family. Leo Moretti was sitting in a high-security Swiss prison awaiting extradition for international terrorism and armed robbery. But that was only the beginning. An anonymous package had been delivered to the Southern District of New York, SDNY. Inside were high-resolution prints of the microscopic ledger and the blackmail photographs. Within 72 hours, the FBI launched a massive coordinated sweep. Judge Harrison Corcoran was arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court in handcuffs. Dozens of corrupt politicians, precinct captains, and Moretti capos were indicted on sweeping RICO charges. The Moretti syndicate was entirely eradicated. But there was one final piece of business to attend to. Roman stood in the dimly lit basement of a meatpacking plant in the Bronx. Tied to a wooden chair in the center of the room was Vinny Costello, his uncle, the man who had sold his own blood for $50,000 a month. Vinny was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically between Roman and the two silent enforcers standing by the door. "Roman, you gotta listen to me," Vinny pleaded, his voice cracking. "It was Leo. He threatened my wife, Roman. He said if I didn't give him the patrol routes, he'd kill her. I did it for family." Roman stood perfectly still, his hands in the pockets of his black bespoke suit. His expression was entirely unreadable. "Family," Roman repeated softly. The word felt like venom on his tongue. "You gave Leo the location of my safe houses. You gave him the security codes to the Pendleton Gallery. You almost got me killed. But worse, Vinny, you almost got her killed." Roman pulled a heavy silver revolver from his jacket. He popped the cylinder, emptying all the bullets into his palm, save for one. He snapped the cylinder shut and gave it a vicious spin. He walked forward and placed the gun on the small table next to Vinny. "The FBI is coming for you, Vinny. Your name was in Mason's journal," Roman said, turning his back on his uncle and walking toward the stairs. "You have 5 minutes before the feds breach the doors upstairs. I suggest you take the honorable way out. Because if you let them take you alive, I will make sure you never survive your first night at Rikers." Roman didn't wait to hear the man's sobbing pleas. He walked up the stairs and stepped out into the cool, biting November air. 2 minutes later, as his armored SUV pulled away from the curb, a single muffled gunshot echoed from the basement. The Costello family was finally clean. An hour later, Roman arrived at the sprawling Long Island estate. The autumn leaves were burning brilliant shades of gold and crimson across the manicured lawns. He bypassed the main house, walking down the stone path toward the private cliffs that overlooked the crashing waves of the Atlantic. Vivian was standing there wrapped in a heavy cream-colored wool coat against the sea breeze. Her dark hair whipped wildly in the wind. She looked breathtaking, stronger. The fear that had defined her when she first jumped into his car was completely gone. Hearing his footsteps, she turned. Her eyes softened as she took him in. Roman stopped a few feet away. From his inside pocket, he withdrew a thick manila envelope and held it out to her. "What is this?" she asked, looking down at it. "A new life," Roman answered quietly. Inside is a passport under the name Sophia Laurent, a birth certificate, a French social insurance number, and the deeds to a flat in Paris and a villa in the south of France. There's also an offshore account with $10 million, clean money, untraceable. Vivian stared at the envelope, her heart pounding a heavy, erratic rhythm against her ribs. "The Morettis are gone. My house is secure." Roman continued, his voice tight, betraying the immense effort it took to speak the words. "You are safe, Vivian. You never have to look over your shoulder again. You can go back to art. You can live in the light. You can leave the monsters behind." He was giving her exactly what she had begged for in the alleyway. Freedom. Vivian reached out. Her fingers brushed the edge of the envelope, but instead of taking it, she pushed his hand away. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until her chest was nearly flush against his. She looked up into his stormy gray eyes, seeing the flash of surprise followed immediately by a dangerous, possessive heat. I told you once, Roman, she whispered, her voice carrying over the sound of the crashing waves. I don't belong in the light anymore. The woman who appraised paintings is dead. She died the moment I stepped into your car. Roman's breath hitched. Vivian, if you stay as mine. In this world there is no stepping back. You will be the queen of a very dark empire. Then show me how to rule, she challenged, a fierce, undeniable fire burning in her eyes. A low, primal sound escaped Roman's throat. He dropped the envelope onto the grass, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. He buried his hands in her hair, tilting her head back, and captured her lips in a kiss that was a binding vow, a promise of violence, loyalty, and a love forged in blood. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. A devastating, victorious smile spread across his face. Found you, he whispered. Wow, what an intense ride. From running for her life in a dark alley to ruling the most powerful underground empire in New York, Vivian's transformation is absolutely incredible. She didn't just survive the Costello syndicate, she conquered the boss's heart. If you were on the edge of your seat during that insane Swiss vault shootout and love this dark mafia romance drama, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the money and run to Paris, or stayed to rule the empire like Vivian? Let me know.